Hello and welcome to the Sallen Coefficient, a video review series in which I take a look at board games and tell you whether or not they're worth your time for how much thinking they're going to put in front of you. Anyway, I'm going to be talking today about some pretty interesting types of games that don't really fit in with the heavy fare that I usually do here on the Sallen Coefficient, and that is escape room games. So escape the room games have been around not terribly long, though in some capacity, you could probably point at some earlier predecessors that have been around for a long time. They really didn't start becoming very big in the hobby until about 2015, where you finally got to see some fairly large escape room games getting released. Anyway, I'm going to tell you guys all about what my thoughts are on escape room games. I'm going to talk about some pretty big series. Three of the biggest series in the escape room games genre are right here in my hands. I've got one from the Unlock series, one from Exit, and one from Escape the Room. So anyway, I'll tell you a little bit about these actual series. I've also got a little teaser of a different one. And then I'm going to make this kind of an overview video so that way you can watch actual reviews of the series itself and maybe even the individual games, depending on how that works once I get to making those videos. So anyway, for now, though, I'm just going to tell you kind of an overview of escape room games, maybe give you an idea of whether or not they're going to be for you and why it is that I've been so drawn to this specific little nook in the hobby of board games. So let me first tell you, well, actually, before I get to any of that, I got business to take care of. The Sallen Coefficient is sponsored by Game Surplus, so please check them out. They're an online game store with a type of customer service and amazing people that you'd find in your favorite local game store. So not every local game store has the amazing customer service you'd expect from Game Surplus. And if you're struggling with that yourself, or if you just want to check out some really cool games and some awesome content, Game Surplus is sponsoring several different podcasts. They sponsor the Sallen Coefficient. I'm in a couple of other podcasts, so you should check out The Long View, check out The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. That's where I really got my start as a host. So if you like what I do, please go and support them at gamesurplus.com. Anyway, let's get to talking first about escape rooms themselves. Because when I first heard that escape rooms were a thing, like, the idea of what you do basically is you put a bunch of people in a room, usually people that have paid a fairly large amount of money, and you put them in a room and lock the door, and they have to find the way to get themselves out in a set amount of time. Usually it's an hour. There's frequently, in the type of complex that I have actually done escape rooms in, there will be a specific person assigned to watching over you while you're in the room. And they're probably watching over several people, but they've got the sort of home surveillance cameras set up in the different rooms, and they've got a screen where the sort of game master can give you hints, tell you what to do if you guys are stuck. Because considering that, like I said, you paid a lot of money, and very frequently $30 is about the going rate for one person, and usually you've got 6 or 7 people, or not always paid for everybody, but there's a lot of money being invested, and so nobody wants to get stuck. So they've got somebody there to kind of help you, guide you through. Puzzles in an escape room can vary widely, and they can be really interesting themes too that are very diverse from one another. The actual escape rooms that I've done have been themed from anywhere from just a regular setting of somebody's game room to a specifically a witchcraft themed dueling room where you can have 2 different groups completing essentially mirror images of the same escape room, but see who gets to get done faster or gets the farthest in case you both fail. I've also done one that was kind of horror themed, and I've done ones that were spy themed, history themed. There's a lot of different things out there for escape rooms, so it's really cool that there's so many different options, so you can kind of pick the one that most interests you. And here in Des Moines, Iowa, I'm near Des Moines, and there's some really good stuff. There's even, I think now, it was just one company that was doing most of the escape rooms, and now I think there's even a second one that's popped up, and maybe even a third and fourth. So they're really something that's gaining traction. They get people involved and interested that aren't necessarily in the gaming hobby, like most of you probably that are watching this video, and they're just something that's a really interesting event that you can get people interested in. So the main thing about escape rooms that I've really enjoyed has been the experience. And I know that's kind of almost a dodge, but you get everybody there together, and you get everybody to sort of start solving puzzles, and you hear the way that people approach a specific situation, a specific puzzle. And I think that's one of the most interesting and unique things about escape rooms, is just the way that you're all there trying to get through the escape room, but you've got different perspectives that result in sometimes laughable and sometimes like really ingenious moments where you feel like you're really proud of your friends or proud of yourself, or you think, how silly, how could we ever have thought that? So that type of experience is largely the same type of thing that I'm looking for when I'm playing a board game. So it was difficult for me at first, though, to really consider how the Sallen coefficient, which for the uninitiated is basically a decisions per minute indicator in board games. Many board games can go on forever and not give you many decisions. Many of them go on forever, and it's amazing because they give you all kinds of decisions, and the depth of those decisions is just unfathomable. It's something that I specifically consider very important when I'm making my own opinion up about whether or not I enjoy a game. So how am I going to now take that Sallen coefficient and lay it on to escape rooms, which really don't involve any sort of decisions, so to say? They're just, can you solve the puzzle? Can you put together the pieces of the puzzle? So when I got to thinking that I've heard Mage Night by a lot of the people that the media that I consume, as well as the friends that I talk to, talk about Mage Night, a huge, sprawling, deck-building, adventuring, kind of pseudo-dungeon crawl, but you're never, I mean, there's not really a dungeon that you're stuck in the whole time. Anyway, it's this huge game that's pointed at as a gigantic logistics puzzle. Like, you make a lot of puzzly decisions where you decide how to assign things, and what you're trying to do is most efficiently solve the puzzle now, so that in the future you can take on a more difficult task and be in the correct state of, correct game state, correct level to be able to accomplish that task. And of course, you've got to solve another puzzle once you get to that task. People really describe Mage Night as being puzzly. Well, that's precisely what you're going to be experiencing when you play an escape room. You're going to be taking on a series of puzzles. Yes, it's linear, and it's really not so much that the person making the decisions about what challenges you're faced with is playing the game. That's more up to the designer. So it kind of turns the designer into, like, they've got quite a bit of judgment as to whether or not they want to make content available, or how they want to sort of like prepare players or expose players to the specific puzzles that are going to be shown, and how they're going to create the world of, or the room. Sometimes it's not that big, sometimes it's just the inside of a single room. How are they going to work all that into creating this sort of experience for players and give them things that they can react to and chew on, not physically, but mentally mull over. I think there's just a lot of interesting decisions that get made from the designer's perspective, and that even further interests me. Sorry about that. Those are my dogs there. Anyway, Bogart has no manners. Shame on you, Bogart. Anyway, let's keep talking about escape rooms. Maybe later on I'll edit that out. Otherwise, you guys just got to meet Bogart, and you're still getting to meet Bogart. Bogart, no! Okay, so let's keep talking about escape rooms, because I was just saying that how puzzly they are lends themselves very well to the same sort of metric that I've already used in the Sallen coefficient to discuss Watson and Holmes. The case Watson and Holmes is kind of like a bunch of mini cases similar to Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. And in that game, you're competitively trying to figure out this underlying puzzle. And the game itself kind of starts to melt away while the world gets created through these little narratives that come out, and that's almost really challenged, almost made me totally deconstruct the Sallen coefficient just for the sake of that game. And I'm going to be drawing on some of the comparisons that I made in that game, in the way that that game created a narrative, and in that game, the actual gameplay and competitive aspects started to melt away as I became more and more interested in the specific story and narrative that was unfolding, even though it was very condensed. And I was very impressed at the amount that they were able to do with the small amount of things that they had going for them. You know, there was only like 14 cards. So anyway, using that as a bit of a comparison, I'm going to actually talk about how successful escape rooms are at doing the same thing that I'm looking for in an actual escape chamber. So I'll get to that, and I'm going to be doing a lot of critical comparisons. If you've never listened to a Sallen coefficient video, I'm basically going to take escape room games as a whole, and I'm going to toss them up against a lot of other different types of games. I'm going to discuss what are the benefits of one, what are the benefits of the other, and I do that very, very quickly. So if you don't want, you know, if you look at this and you're like, oh my goodness, that's like a 30-minute video, which I'm not sure exactly how long this will be, but it could be pretty long. Check out those little timestamps down at the bottom. Those timestamps are going to help you jump around and find whatever you are most interested in. So far, I've talked about why I really, really like escape rooms themselves, but now I want to talk about why I like escape room games, or why I was interested in escape room games. I first thought, how are they going to fit all of this into a specific box? When I look at something this size, I think that right there, comparing this, you know, this little thing to the entire rooms that I've known and experienced, and I've played 6 or 7 of them, I mean, how can they even do it? You know, so at first I was just like, it's not possible. I've got to see how it works. Next, I was really interested in specifically trying to recreate this because of how impossibly expensive these escape rooms are. I once paid nearly $200, well, over $200 after tax, to get some family and friends all into an escape room together at face value, at ticket price. So I didn't get any sort of a deal. 6 people for an hour paying $200 was ridiculous. And to me, this is half the cost of one single ticket, and you end up spending the same amount of time. But at what price? What are you, well, obviously not an actual physical monetary price, but what are you giving up when you go to a small box like this? So that was what really interested me. There's a few other little like kind of minor points I'd like to bring up that have been really interesting. I think that the puzzles that you specifically see in these games are all going to be trying to challenge the player, maybe cause them to think, I don't know where to go from here. That seems to be something that when you figure out what the actual answer is, it always like makes you feel dumb. And to me, like when these games make me feel dumb, I feel like they're doing their job right. So if you don't like that, maybe this isn't for you. Also, I especially enjoy the puzzles that aren't just made to have an interesting solution or to have a solution that somehow evokes its theme. That can be cool. But to me, really interesting puzzle design involves not just the best solution, but the best way to fail the puzzle. There was some specific puzzles, even in this game that I'm holding right here, that I was like, man, they really developed this red herring. They developed it to make you feel like I'm actually on the right track here. And I felt like I was quite surprised when my theory and the group's theory did not quite work out. So I'm not going to say anything spoiler-wise about this game or any of the other ones. At least I'll say anything in advance if I do. But let's see here. Are your decisions? I think. Oh, I did have one line here that I thought was pretty cool, and I wanted to share with you guys that came up from something I heard from a friend, and that was, I think that occasionally you will see the limitations of an actual board game and the fact that it's a small box, but even more often I'm seeing the way that these games shine light on the defects of actual escape rooms. In a way, the difference between one of these games and an actual escape room can be the same as the difference between watching a movie and reading a book. Because you are consuming these games largely with your mind's eye and not only your corporeal ones, anything can be possible. And I think that, reading that book in a lot of ways is the same way that I compare board games to video games. Board games are to video games the same way that books are to movies. I really think that if you are willing to give a little bit of a chance here, you are going to find a very rewarding puzzle, a very rewarding experience at the core of these escape room games. So let's give a quick overview here of some of the different and popular series out there. Let's go ahead and start out with the one that won the Kennerspiel des Jahres, the Connoisseur Game of the Year, the Exit the Game series. I have the 3 Exit games here, and one in specific won the Kennerspiel. This one, the Abandoned Cabin. So I'm not going to specifically show you anything from the Abandoned Cabin. I'm going to be very careful not to. I just want to say that the way that Exit handles their puzzles is entirely contained inside this box. You're not going to need anything else except maybe like a piece of paper. You're not going to need any sort of electronic devices or anything like that. Just pens, paper, totally analog. I know that within the board gaming hobby, a lot of people can be kind of like turned off by the fact that something can include something electronic. There's nothing electronic here, and Exit has found an ingenious way of making their puzzles solvable without any sort of electronics and still being able to come up with interesting solutions. They do so with a decoder ring. Now, I'm going to show that decoder ring, so if you don't want to see it, look away. But the way that the decoder ring works is that you've got each puzzle corresponds to a specific symbol. This also works with a hint deck that corresponds to that symbol as well. So if you get stuck, you can find that. But what you're going to want to do is there's 3 different layers on this decoder ring. You're going to want to line up the either color or number of the specific solution, and there's going to be 3 of them, so like a 999 or a black, yellow, red, or whatever it is, and you're going to line that up, and you're going to see on the bottom, on this bottom wheel, there's a little viewing window that now showcases a specific number. You'll go digging in an answer deck, and that answer deck might have a card that has a big X on it that says you're totally wrong. It might have a card that has a bunch of other pictures on it, like 9 pictures or 10 pictures that show you basically all of the physical puzzles in the game. Like, for example, it'll show you a picture of a lockbox, and you'll need to know, like, okay, well, the puzzle I'm working on right now goes to a lockbox or to a cabinet or to a specific area in a room. But anyway, you're going to need to solve that. And frequently, you're going to find this answer card. There's only 30 of these answer cards, but they kind of make you, it gives you a extra step so that way you're not finding the answer by accident, if that makes any sense. I think it's really cool that they have designed it so that you don't accidentally stumble upon answers here. Because if it was just on the back of cards, it wouldn't be quite as, that could happen quite a bit more frequently, where you accidentally find the right answer or you find the wrong answer, but it's the right answer for a different puzzle. When you've only got 30 of these cards, there's only so many different, ways that you can line up this viewing window. So anyway, you're going to be using that decoder ring and specifically a booklet. There is a booklet that gets used, and that booklet must be passed around to different players. And that booklet is like 12 pages long and contains most of the puzzles. I don't want to say most, maybe a large amount of the puzzles in the game have at least partial pieces that are contained all within this booklet. So that system itself, to me, is very good for the fact that it's totally analog and that it's done a decoder ring in a really interesting way. However, that booklet can mean it kind of becomes difficult to play with a large amount of people. If you're sitting there reading the booklet to yourself, I mean, unless you're like me, you're a teacher and you're able to read upside down, you're going to be the only one reading it whenever you have it. It's kind of not conducive to the type of party environment that I associate with a big escape room game. So that's one of the limitations here. I would say, though, that overall, Exit the Game has been able to really captivate me by having puzzles that challenge all different types. I mean, you've got puzzles, in my opinion, the most strong puzzles in these types of games use the components in a way that you would never have expected. And, you know, the more that you play them, the better you'll get at being able to kind of see what tricks they get up their sleeves and whatnot. But I would say that Exit really starts to push that. Now, the first one in the Exit series, Abandoned Cabin, is actually my least favorite. It is the one that I think is the most basic, the most uninteresting, and specifically the way they have their puzzles structured and the largest ending puzzle, to me, is almost defeating of the world that it tries to create. It has a logistical flaw in it, that a flaw of logic, a flaw of continuity, something that really causes me to get hung up on, and it's probably fairly minor, especially considering that I'm willing to forgive so many things in board games, so many leaps of faith and understanding that the theme and the mechanics sometimes don't always mix. Anyway, the way that I would specifically describe Exit, the Abandoned Cabinet, is the weakest in the series. However, I don't even consider it the best place to start out. I would say that if you really are interested in Exit, start out with the Secret Lab. That one is, in my opinion, the one that it has a really great little chemistry theme, and you're doing a lot of mixing like elements together and burning through locks. It feels really cool that way. The Abandoned Cabin, to me, is only play this one if you know that you love the system. It's just, aside from that, it's not that exciting to me. The Pharaoh's Tomb is the pinnacle of the experience. It's the tip of the pyramid. The Pharaoh's Tomb uses what's in this box in ingenious ways. It does so with puzzles that blow my mind, and when I go back and think about them, they make me think about how ingenious the designer of this specific game was when designing the puzzles in here. They all adhere to the Egyptian theme in an amazing way, much like the Secret Lab. And in my opinion, it's the strongest of them. It's also the most difficult. So if I could do like locks, I would say that this one has got like about a 4 or 5. I would say maybe 4 locks out of 5. And then the Secret Lab is probably 2 locks out of 5. And then I would give the Abandoned Cabin probably 3 locks out of 5. But it just is the one that's less exciting to me. So anyway, that's Exit. And now let's move on to talk about a different series, and that is specifically the Unlock series of games. Unlock, there are 3 of them that I've got in my hand right here, and there's a few other smaller ones. Unlock is, I think, a great place to start with the actual escape game series. If you're interested in them, I would start with Unlock. And consequently, you can probably find it used, because it's like the only one of these games where you're not touching any of the components in a way that's going to destroy them. In Exit, depending on the game, you're going to be destroying components. And some of them are going to be easier to actually conserve than others, but saying that would kind of give away some of the actual game. So I won't go specifically into that. Anyway, Exit is just going to be a deck of cards in here. That's literally all that it is. Each of these, though, comes with a tutorial, mission. And I've actually got that tutorial right here. So if you're really purist and don't want to see anything, look away and just listen here. But basically the tutorial, like all the missions, are going to set you up with a lot of text, and you're going to flip over the starting card, and it's going to give you, most of the time, an aerial view, sometimes not, of a bunch of different features of the room. You're going to then dig through your deck of cards to find cards that correspond to each one of those. Very frequently, your cards are going to have red numbers and blue numbers, which have interlocking puzzle pieces when you take a look at them. And you're going to want to take, for example, a cabinet and a key, mix them together, and you'll mix together the numbers on the cards to then find a card that has that number, and voila, maybe you'll find a cabinet to open. You'll also be wanting to pore over these cards because you might see a little hidden number hiding away that you can then find and dig for that card, and it'll show you, ooh, you found a key, or you found a wire, or something like that. So you're going to be wanting to not only think about what the actual function of every item is, but you're also going to want to pore over it, like every single inch. You're going to be with your eyes poring over it to see whether or not there's any open or any hidden numbers for you to then dig through for another card. However, there's one big potential hang up here in the Unlock series, and that is that the Unlock series utilizes an app. With a deck of cards, there's only so much you can do. But with the app, you are able to do 4-digit codes, so not just 3-digit codes like was done in the Exit series. But here, you're going to be able to use 4-digit codes. You may be able to piece them together by any sort of unholy means and machinations that you might find throughout the game. You're going to also be able to discover your hints on that app as well. If you get stuck, you can press the number of a card into the system and it'll give you a hint. And this is one of my favorite things, it plays theme music in the background and actually has a few hints for some of those hidden cards that are especially difficult to discover. But to me, it just really, like, there's able to be some multimedia clues, some actual like audio clues. Not seen any visual clues yet come up on the actual app, but the audio clues are really interesting. So I've been very impressed by that, and they've done it in a lot of different languages. So unless you're anti-technology in your board games, which I think is a very, it's a very arbitrary position to take, I think that Unlock has some great interactivity through the app. Now, Unlock actually utilizes a countdown system as opposed to Exit. Exit counts upwards, and the shorter you get done, the higher your score. In Unlock, you actually have an hour, and then every time that you come up with a card that's an X on it that has like a penalty sign, you actually have to press a button that's going to take away time from your team. It is ridiculous. Like, it says an hour, but yeah, it's actually like 45 minutes, and I am yet to solve any of the Unlock games in the allotted amount of time. So consider that. Higher stress, Unlock. Higher stress, what I like. Thus, Unlock is kind of more up my alley. However, I can totally see how, especially when you're working together with a group, the Exit series is a lot more pleasant. You don't have the feeling of constantly needing to be efficient with your time and frustrated when you can't find things, or when other people can't find things, or when people are taking too long looking at different things. Like, it's, you know, it's a lot different when there's a win or lose on the line as opposed to a this many stars, you know, like the higher your rating, I could care less about the rating. When I'm told that I fail by a game, that especially can grate, I think, on people's psyche. So it's not an issue for me. Honestly, I'm more excited, and it's a more tense experience with the Unlock games. So anyway, consider that, though, when you're making your ultimate decision. Other things with the Unlock game that I think are worthy of pointing out is that the specific puzzles and the specific the worlds that they create, in my opinion, are pushing way outside of an escape room. Exit the game is still firmly modeled after escape rooms. The type of things you could do in an escape room. Like, they're usually fairly small sets, fairly small like scenery, and everything is kind of a linear set of puzzles, not so much about creating the world. Whereas in Unlock, really it starts to blow up. It starts to get way outside of a specific room, and outside of what even feels possible in just a little deck of cards. So they call it Unlock Escape Adventures, and I really think that there's a lot more being explored here in terms of the direction that they can take the escape room, specifically the escape rooms in general. So let's start by talking about each one of these. The formula, very much a basic escape room. There is some really interesting multimedia clues here, but it's very much just a basic escape room experience. Unlock Squeak and Sausage is actually my personal favorite because it's kind of like Pinky and the Brain for American viewers. That it has that same sort of like goofy mad scientist, you're out there to get them, and it has just a cartoony aspect and in a quirky soundtrack that I'm very interested in, and I think that it's a nice change of pace. There's nothing else like it. Really, really cool. And the way that everything sort of incorporates this silly, kooky, mad professor, really interesting, and like I said, my favorite. And then the Unlock Adventure, the third one here, the Island of Dr. Gorse, actually is going to split players up into 2 separate teams and you can't play this one solo. I think it's a little bit strange for that, and people can get frustrated if they're solving puzzles slower than others, and there does need to be some sort of communication, but the communication is limited by the game. Anyway, it's an interesting system. I think that it's especially frustrating for new players, so avoid this one like the plague if you're new, unless you're okay like me with just kind of bending the rules so that you keep moving through. But anyway, like I said, I haven't won any of these anyway, so I never really feel that guilty about cheating because I know I'm going to lose anyway. Starting spot, though, definitely check out either one of these. And you'll be able, though, to do the tutorial in any of them. So this is a really great starting off point because it has these tutorials, and it's using the multimedia through the actual app. And there's not a need for like a decoder ring or anything like that, and the app just kind of makes sense. I guess maybe it's because I'm in the generation that was sort of raised on technology. It wasn't until I was an adult, really, though, that phones started to get smart, if you know what I mean. But I still feel very comfortable with the app, and I'm not at all worried about the fact that I've got technology. You know, I'm not averse to technology. Last one I'm going to talk about is Escape the Room. This is, I think, the oldest of these. It says 2015. The other ones are both 2016 or 2017. And this one is made by Thinkfun, and I would just say that it's more of a kid's game. Even though it's made to look like it's an adult's game, it really feels to me like the specific puzzles in here remind me of like 3rd grade level things. Like there's tangrams. Literally, they call them tangrams in one of the online. Like you can actually put this one back together. So compared to Exit, where you destroy it, and Unlock, where you don't destroy it at all, here, you actually do have to open up some sealed envelopes so you could tear things accidentally, but there is instructions online for how to set this back up so you can pass it on to somebody else. It just isn't entirely intuitive. You kind of have to put in some new tape, and in some cases, they won't necessarily get everything looking spick and span. So here, though, like I said, there's tangrams. There's a few really big struggles, though. You're going to be using a decoder wheel like you were in Exit, only here, it still has your puzzles on the outside, but all you're looking to do is match up the puzzle on the outside with the same image on the inside. There has to be 2 showing solutions. So basically, I'm going to be looking for all these different symbols, and they are symbols here. There's no numbers or anything like that. Really, they just relegated themselves to only symbols. And when you finally find the solution, it just tells you, hey, it's okay. Now you can go and open up this puzzle packet. Which I understand that like none of these games are really necessarily exactly the same as an escape room where you're like actually physically opening up a lock and getting into a room for the first time. But it just feels like kind of weird when I've got this packet sitting right over here that I could just open, and all I've got to do is just let the decoder ring tell me, oh yeah, it's okay. Whereas an Exit, it actually tells me what card to look for, and there's like that extra step where, you know, I'm not supposed to look at the bottom of the cards. Here, solving the puzzle is really anticlimactic because it's just like, yeah, we already know what the solution is. Fine, just open up the packet. So there's a little bit of an issue there. Another real poor spot here, a real pockmark for Escape the Room, is that you've got this really cool-looking mansion on the box cover, and never once did I feel like I was in this mansion. I just felt like I had a bunch of puzzle packets, and I did not think that it was an actual spot. Even though there is a narrative to this game that's fairly well developed, I never once felt like I was in a physical place. It never built up the actual mansion. I never felt like this room was connected to this room or anything like that. It just felt like here's a bunch of antiques, and I don't know where they are. I don't know really what, you know, I wasn't all that interested and invested. The story itself is okay, but the world building here gets a real low rating. And if that's kind of one of the things that you look for, like me in escape rooms, avoid this one. So those are the 3 main escape room series that are a part of this overview video. I might be talking about each of those more, like what's going on in them more individually. I'll just tease you really quick here that you can expect there to be a separate review of this Escape Room in a Box, which was a Kickstarter, and this one quite a bit more expensive than all the other ones. So it's supposed to have some nicer manipulatives and actual physical locks and other things. So I'll be talking about that and how successful this one is in the future after I play it, which I'm planning on doing actually fairly soon after recording this because it is close to Halloween and it's Halloween themed. So that is the main escape room discussion that I have about each one of these, now I'm going to do some critical comparisons between these escape room games and other popular games or game systems. We're going to start out first with Robinson Crusoe, a cooperative game that heavy gamers like myself know and love because it takes you on a story that you feel invested in because the game still feels fair, though you're dealing with random events and things that you're out of control of. Now, Robinson Crusoe uses things called scenarios, which are fairly popular in all different types of games because it essentially gives you a different goal or a different behavior of a game system to have to play with. The scenarios, though, have quite a bit of replayability because you're always going to be coming up with different encounters as you play. And those encounter decks are, yes, shuffled in the same between scenarios, but it's just kind of interesting because scenarios are able to give you a feel of like being attacked by people on the island, or of just trying to survive on the island, or of trying to get around the island and destroy things that are bringing bad omens. There's some really interesting things going on in these Robinson Crusoe, but as a game system, scenarios are quite different than unlock adventures. Like an unlock adventure or an escape room adventure is by design, I would say, not going to take you on the same sort of story feeling that you get in others. It is much more like you can sit down and say, this is a puzzle. How am I going to solve this specific puzzle? And I feel like very frequently, the escape room games will actually take a thematic hit, and I would say much more common in Exit and Escape the Room. So in these two, you see more of a thematic hit as you're looking at a page of things, and it looks just kind of like a puzzle you might see in the newspaper. I do think that Unlock the game is a lot more immersive, and it involves a lot more of you actually combining things that you're finding, and thematically succeeds in a way that's fairly close to on par with the scenarios that you'll find in Robinson Crusoe. But you know, the cooperative aspect of them and the way that you've each got a character and you can combine these different characters, that's about as far as I can make a comparison there. Any further is already stretching there. So that's Robinson Crusoe. Now I'm going to talk about Time Stories. Time Stories is an interesting beast of sorts. Time Stories is actually designed by the same company, Space Cowboys, that made the Unlock series. So Time Stories, same company, came out a little bit earlier. And so how does Time Stories compare to Unlock? Well, with Time Stories, you have to buy a game, a full-size game, and it only comes with one scenario. And it costs about 4 or 5 times the cost of one of these little Unlock games. However, that game, now you can purchase like little modules that can extend the game by giving you another chapter. And they're very self-contained stories. Generally, they are going to involve a deck of cards roughly twice the size of the card amount is roughly twice the size of what's in Unlock. But in Time Stories, you're going to be generally finding that lots of these cards are like, there will be 5 or 6 cards that are all the part of a single panorama. And what you'll do is you'll be exploring, and then you'll be frequently asked to pause the game and do like some sort of a check. There are dice in the game. Each character is going to have, players actually assume a role, and their character is going to have a different capability, like a different amount of brains or whatever. There's different, like, it's kind of like an RPG where you get different stats, and you're sometimes rolling against, you know, in like a combat sort of situation, or you're trying to do a search or something like that. And you'll occasionally find puzzles, but very frequently in Time Stories, it's more about the interactions that you're having with the environment. And so it's about, like, you know, exploring each of these different 6 cards. Now, Time Stories, even the base game itself is like 5 times the cost of this, 4 times the cost of this. Then every single module actually continues to be double the cost of an Unlock game. And I would argue that you are getting the same amount of game in Time Stories. It's just more produced. There's more things for you to look at, and there's more like of a story that's been written. But that story doesn't change. However, the game system attempts to elongate itself by having players go through the game multiple times. Like, you are going to have to restart the game when you run out of time, and then start from the very beginning. And guess what changes? That's right. Nothing. Nothing changes. You are supposed to do the exact same thing. Yeah, that ain't happening. I don't know if you knew this, but I ain't got time to do the same thing that I did before. As a matter of fact, I'll just go and say 5 minutes ago we were here before I found the card that says, ha ha ha, you've been spent the last 5 minutes doing essentially dumb stuff that gets you nowhere. Okay, cool. Let's just rewind that so that way I don't have to replay, because I got to tell you, I'm not going to replay something if I already know what happens. And I don't expect a whole room full of people to either. That seems ridiculous, especially if I'm replaying something because I rolled dice poorly. Yeah, I'll just set the die to what I want them to be and not worry about this rudimentary dice system. Instead, what I like about time stories, and especially the first one called Asylum, was that there was a puzzle at its core. There was a lot of little things for you to assemble. I almost feel like as they were making time stories, the designers were like, you know what? This puzzle system doesn't really work with time stories. These actual logistical puzzles we're presenting people, not logistical puzzles necessarily, but just our puzzles, these sort of logic puzzles that we're presenting people don't really fit with all the theme we're trying to throw at players. And we're going to instead take all of those cool puzzles and put them into the Unlock series, and they're going to we're just going to let time stories be entirely about story, and we're going to try to craft a cool story that way. Well, great, because the only thing I liked about time stories was the logistical puzzles. So you take that away, and there's nothing left for me. I especially loathed the second time stories Marcy case is what it was called. The Marcy case was, to me, the most disappointing gaming experience. I would say the most disappointing consumable game experience I've ever had, meaning it's a game that I can't replay. And so I was especially surprised to find how positive I feel about the Unlock series. It's like all of the good things of time stories without any of the stuff that I dislike. It even incorporates an app, so there isn't a need for all these extra pieces that apparently make the game cost $60 when you first buy it. So Unlock completely by itself replaces time stories, and in general made me realize that this type of system was for me, even if time stories wasn't for me. So I definitely think that maybe if you're somebody who can appreciate time stories, you can maybe see like what it is that you like there, and see maybe this will give you exactly what you're looking for without some of those things that frustrated me. And maybe those things, though, are something that you liked as well. So you can still check out time stories in the future. But I'm kind of done with time stories. I've got what I was looking for the whole time without any of the added fluff. So that's my thoughts on time stories. Next up, I wanted to talk about Eldritch Horror, because Eldritch Horror is kind of an interesting game. Eldritch Horror is a game that is replayable, I suppose, but it's only replayable as long as there's novelty involved. Because Eldritch Horror is a cooperative game that's really mainly about silly events and flipping over cards. And it especially showed when I played a game of Eldritch Horror and I heard a card that I'd already heard before. Now, the chances of that happening were low because it was only my second game. But hearing that card, I was like, oh, that's that card. Yep, I know that card. That's it. Because that game is only entertaining as long as it's new and novel. That, to me, means even if you say, oh, I want my games to be replayable, and you play a game like Eldritch Horror, yeah, it's not really replayable. That's why there's so many expansions coming out for it all the time, because you have to have new cards. You have to get new story events coming out. You have to have that. You need the novelty. Otherwise, the simplicity of the system shows bare, and there's nothing really there. So that's my thoughts on Eldritch Horror. Now let's talk a little bit about Betrayal at House on the Hill, an incredibly popular game, especially for people who are really new to the hobby. And if maybe I'm the first thing that you've seen after watching a lot of tabletop, well, here's your trial by fire, because Betrayal at House on the Hill is one that really suffers in entertaining me because of how broken it can feel. You get, like, the story that you get from Betrayal at House on the Hill can be very interesting, but it's so inconsistent. And it is kind of in a way like these puzzles here. It's like the puzzles that you'll find in Unlock and other escape rooms, but there's one main thing, and that's that you're kind of almost, the puzzle is like the actual figuring out the mechanisms of the game itself based on the 50 different possible directions it can take because of all the different haunts. Now, the difference here is Unlock has only one direction, and you can only be played once, but it's a good direction. And you're not going to find yourself in like a broken, how does this work? This isn't interesting. Playing chess with death is a boring scenario even to start with. How could they make this fun? Yeah. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Betrayal at House on the Hill. I think the Unlock series is a lot more deliberate, and I feel a lot more entertained by the specific experience because of that deliberate design. Let's talk a little bit about legacy games. Pandemic Legacy. Gloomhaven has some legacy elements to it. Legacy games involve players destroying pieces of the game, and what legacy games really seek to do is get players more involved in the world by letting players do things like name characters, control or keep track of their characters from one game to another. And in Unlock, you're not going to be doing something like that, but you are going to only be playing it once. So if you really like self-expression, I don't think that these Unlock games are really the best for necessarily that sort of play. But if you're really interested in, say, like in the Pandemic Legacy has some really interesting wrinkles that are thrown onto the game, and it gives you some interesting tools to work with. In a lot of ways, Unlock can, in many ways, have the same sort of things, but there's definitely not going to be as explicit of instructions of what you need to do to win. So a lot of times in these Unlock games, you're left feeling like, I don't know how to advance, and that's common. If you feel that way, that's normal. You know, you're playing it right. You're not just sucking or anything like that. So understand that. I think that you know, if you play the legacy games, you're at least one step closer to being able to play something that's a one-time consumable game. Next up, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is a game that's been around since 1981 and involves a lot of interesting narrative that it presents a logic puzzle for players and how to solve like some sort of a murder or other crime. And you're going to be largely limited by how many times you can go and investigate because you want to solve the case before Sherlock Holmes, or at least close to him, because, yeah, I still haven't heard of anybody actually solve it before Sherlock Holmes, though that's supposed to be possible. Anyway, the way that Sherlock Holmes works is much like a choose-your-own-adventure game, except there is game mechanisms because you're trying to solve it in as little time as possible. I really think this shares a lot in common with the Unlock games, only the main difference to me is that they can get a lot more creative and there's a lot more manipulables, even though they're on cards in Unlock and escape room games and Exit, than there can be possible in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. However, to contrast that, I think that Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective really can take you more deep into the story of the actual game, or at least that's what I felt, and I don't think there's that much of a narrative that unravels or that becomes apparent in the Unlock games. I think it's a lot more about interesting little puzzles, and it's a lot more about activating prior knowledge, like if you're into like Greek mythology, or if you're into Egyptian things, or if you're interested in science. That's much more it's much more on surface level, the theme in these escape room games. Whereas in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, you get deep into the theme and the narrative, and it is very well crafted. Finally, actual escape chambers. And I guess this is one of the biggest points that I have to make, is that actual escape chambers, for me, they're kind of done. I'm done paying that much money when what I can get in this box not necessarily is going to be better in every case. But I have had escape room experiences better in a box than I have in person. And that's not to say that I haven't played some really amazing ones in person. But there is so much at stake there. I expect so much from how much I'm paying that it just is unrealistic. When I know how much enjoyment I can get from a box like this without even having to leave my home, they're not even around for me anymore. Actual escape chambers are interesting to me, and I owe them nostalgia because they got me interested in the system, but these types of experiences are what I'm going to be looking for into the future. Unless you've got a ticket to buy me one, don't expect to see me in any escape chambers. So one of the main detractors, I can say, for escape chambers themselves is specifically that a lot of the puzzles and stuff involve resetting, and I've had it once or twice where the person that was supposed to reset our puzzle didn't exactly do it correctly, or they forgot, to put this thing back in this place. And so we ended up in a kind of unsolvable situation, and the person, they were watching over us and they were like, look here, sorry about that. but it was just a little bit frustrating that way. And that's just because it's actually physically going to need to be reset every time. And that's something that, like, there's a reset pack in this escape room in a box. So the bigger that you get and the more intricate that you get, the more like lifelike you get, the more that it's going to be about, you know, like, ooh, cool manipulables, as opposed to, oh, that was a great puzzle. And I think that when you've got the type of confinement, you know, sometimes a restriction is what breeds the most creativity, because you have this restricted, you know, this is just a deck of cards to work with. And there's been some just amazing puzzles that have come out of these that have been better than what I've seen in an escape room. Also, some of the older escape rooms that I've done had some obvious puzzles. Like there was a map where you're supposed to take these thumbtacks and put them in, and you could just see where all this stuff was. You didn't even need the thumbtacks because there, you know, all the map board was just totally eaten away around all the different coordinates. So, you know, that's something where the actual manipulables can detract from the experience unless it's extremely well run. And from what I understand, the one in Des Moines is like standard across the entire country in terms of how well managed it is. And a lot of escape rooms around the country are basing themselves on the escape room that I specifically have been to 6 or 7 times down in Des Moines, Iowa. So actual escape rooms, love them, would love to go back to them, but I just don't have the money, and I don't want to have to drive all the way across town or all the way an hour to get to one. So I can get that in this type of an experience. And that's why I really love escape room games. If you like these videos, please donate to disaster relief. Specifically, the people of Puerto Rico are really, really in need right now. I know that there's a lot of ways you can donate. There's a lot of ways that you can provide help. A friend of mine is actually, his brother-in-law is actually down in Puerto Rico, seeing that there's a lot of need down there, a lot of people without power, a lot of people that are sick, that are needing power in their hospitals. So please, give in whatever way you can possible, because I'm not asking for anything specifically from you to me. Just make the world a better place if you like these videos. Thanks a lot, and I'll catch you on the next Sallen Coefficient.